Here's somebody who does not feel the pain of the Ukrainian people, and that's the President Zelensky. Here's his response to what we just saw Secretary Blinken say, cut number 13.
Thank you so much. Thanks for coming to Ukraine, especially these days. Not simple period for Ukraine, and a tough period for the east of our country, for our warriors. Thank you that you came, especially these days, to support Ukraine. We need today two patriots for Kharkiv region, because the people are under attack, civilians and warriors, everybody. They are under Russian missiles.
What do you think he means when he says two batteries, Tony?
Well, I think the Ukrainians have been screaming for more Patriot missiles. Now, the Patriots are very effective against most ballistic missiles, both guided and unguided. The problem is this: Russians are within 17 miles of Kharkiv, so no amount of batteries of anything, except maybe some tactical counter battery fire that would be able to kind of do artillery on artillery. There's no hope. Kharkiv is gone. I don't know. I can't give you the exact date it's going to fall, but I'd say within the next week, you're going to see essentially the encapsulation of Kharkiv by the Russians, coming kind of isolating it from the rest of the country. So I just don't think that any batteries are going to do any good. So the Russians continue to pummel the infrastructure. I can't say what they're targeting. I don't have that information, but I can say that they are very much bumping up against the outskirts. And 17 kilometers, you could use mortars almost at that range. So no battery is going to do any different.
What are the signs we should look for, the behavior we should look for on the part of Ukrainian people, Ukrainian government, Ukrainian military, that defeat is imminent?
Two things. And both of them reflect kind of what the Russians did. I mean, what the Nazis did at the end of World War II. Second, first one is depending on wonder weapons. We've already seen that. Just the next weapon is going to be that thing that breaks the back of the Russian advance. There was all these wonder weapons that the Germans supposedly had that would stop the Russians and U.S. We were allied back then, and nothing ever stopped the inevitable move on the Nazi forces. I think the same thing can be said here. Don't people are going to get upset, I know, about my comparison, but it is what it is. Secondly, they're going to be more desperate about manpower. One of the things I think there's been great debate about returning Ukrainian military-aged men from other countries in the EU. There's a great deal of pressure on NATO members to kind of cough them up, which goes against all of the EU's humanitarian laws, saying that people have the right to be refugees and not have to be forced into conscription or military service. Well, except for when they're needed for Ukraine. So I think they're going to get more and more desperate for manpower, because that's really what they're seeking. And as an extension on the manpower issue, I think you're going to see more and more military units not being willing to show up for the inevitable pummeling they're going to get if they actually have to face the Russians in the conditions that they're currently facing. So it's
Chris is going to post a map showing the red is the area totally under Russian control.
Yeah.
I mean, what are Putin's goals? Does he want to go much farther?
I don't think the goal is pretty clear, and he and Lavrov have said several times they want to have essentially control of Ukraine as much as they need to ensure that what they have they can maintain, and that other areas cannot be used to launch attacks into Russia. There's been attacks into to a number of places up near Chernobyl, into Russia, that they've done attacks there. So I think you're talking about the potential of military operations to secure border areas which have been used to launch attacks against Russia, against Russian civilians. So that's where you may see an expansion of the war. as well as going after and trying to destroy any element of the of Ukraine which can be used to stop the Russians from essentially regularizing that those areas they currently have control of. So they're going to be able to secure what they have and probably go up to the Dnieper. And I think they want Odessa as well, just saying. So I think Odessa is another area where they said they want. That could be a major separate battle.
How wrong is President Biden when he keeps using this sort of pat phrase, Putin takes Ukraine? The last thing in the world Putin wants to do is govern Ukraine.
No, they want Ukraine to be a buffer state, as it has been essentially since the end of the Cold War, and what they want it to be again. They don't. I think there was a deal on the table when the war started to stop the war. They could have even joined the EU. I believe the Russians would have let there be an economic relationship, but they could never join NATO. There is a natural paranoia the Russians have. Judges have to accept it. They are who they are. And the idea that somehow we're going to change and moderate the behavior of the Russian people as a culture is insane. So I think they would have accepted EU membership for Ukraine, no NATO membership, but they did want to have some level of influence to make sure that Ukraine was demilitarized. For better or for worse, I'm not here to judge it, but the Russians are afraid of NATO and NATO expansionism, which is kind of what NATO has done, despite promises when the treaty was made back in the 90s. I think it was 94, 95, that I think it was a Budapest agreement. It said basically we wouldn't move west, NATO would not move east, and obviously Russia would not move west, and we'd stay, kind of in that static state. Well, that's not happened. NATO has expanded, so Russia will never permit Ukraine to become part of Russia. They will never permit Ukraine to become part of NATO, period.
So about a week ago, Rishi Sunak, the Prime Minister of Great Britain, the unelected Prime Minister of Great Britain, threatened to send what he called an expeditionary force. What is this?
Yes.
The Polar War expeditionary force. But anyway, that's the phrase they use. I shouldn't mock that. The language is the same, but the terminology is different, to Ukraine. Even though you and McGregor and Ritter and the others have told us that you could fit the entire British military in Yankee Stadium. Nevertheless, he made this threat, and and the Russians responded. Your former colleague in the military, I'm joking because you two have nothing in common, Admiral Kirby, the official spokesperson for the United States government, cut number one, Chris, said
there's been threats from Moscow in the last couple of days about striking British military facilities and also simulating nuclear drills as it sharply rises tensions because of weapons manufactured in the UK being used in the conflict. This says it could potentially apply to other allied countries as well, theoretically the United States. Do you have a response to that?
Well, what I'd say, number one, is it's just reckless and irresponsible for the leader of a major nuclear-armed power to be saber-rattling the way that he is with respect to potential use for nuclear weapons. We monitor this and have continued to monitor this very closely. I can tell you we've seen nothing, even despite the reckless rhetoric, that would cause us to change our strategic deterrent posture. And look, lastly, if Mr. Putin and Russian officials are worried about their troops in Ukraine getting hit with weapons from other countries, then the easiest thing to do is just take your troops and leave.
How absurd is that last statement? Take your troops and leave after all this.
So John Kirby lives in an alternate universe. John is. I've comment on John's comments all the time, and that's John Kirby. He would send his mother to Kharkiv if he thought for a minute that would delay the inevitable Russian advances in there, just to give him a few minutes on the podium. The Russians have said, as a matter of policy, that they will respond to any threat that comes at them from Ukraine. If you put British troops into Ukraine, they will be attacked. There have been, I think, credible reporting, Judge, on foreign troops being in Ukraine being targeted by Russia, and I think there's been a number of there's been Americans killed there. There's been British. There's been French, and so I don't see how anybody could be surprised by the Russian statement. If there's an escalation to a level requiring nuclear weapons or weapons are going to be used, Russians will respond with nuclear weapons. They've said it as a matter of policy. There's no ambiguity there. So John Kirby to kind of do his nonsensical comments relating to they think somehow the Russians are saying something that's inappropriate, I think is just again the Biden White House not understanding the Russian culture. They don't understand Putin. They don't want to understand Putin. They don't want to understand what he's after. That was the thing that you and I think would agree on. Reagan would always play the man. He wouldn't play the policy, he'd play the man. It was like a poker game. And by now, Reagan and others would have figured out how to deal with Putin and what he wants, and that's something they will not address.